this isn't about a loosey-goosey look at life. This isn't about weakness. This isn't about all of a sudden not having anything to stand up for. It's the opposite. It's like when I stand for something, it's something that is worth standing for instead of standing for everything. And I think it's easy to think of this as sort of, as you get older, you get passive. And that's not what the second half of life is. It couldn't be any further from the truth. The second half, according to Rohrer, is that you get more focused on the things that matter. And the things that you don't, so few things matter that it begins to draw your focus, and people are so attracted to people who are focused. Hello and welcome back to the Better Everyday Podcast. John and Darren back at you again for another book review.
Yeah, John, this one's fun because, I mean, this one, like all the books that we're going to be talking about,
we wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't awesome.
Life-changing for us. I remember, this one's Falling Upward by Richard Rohr, but I remember telling one of my good friends, Denny, about this book. And Denny was moving from Bloomington, Indiana.
Out west somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know how, I mean, Denny's in his
60s?
Yeah. No, older than that.
Oh, maybe he is.
Anyway, moving out west, be with his kids, and listen to this book on the way out there. Mm-hmm. And he called me with tears in his eyes, saying how life-changing this particular book was. So
yeah, this is one of those that I keep handy. I have at least one extra copy all the time. So we had the Better Everyday barn reset here at the barn. Here in September, we had a couple of them, and we had 70 people or so, and we had a Better Everyday library, and you just walk in and pick up books, take them home with you. And this one was went real fast.
Unreasonable hospitality.
That's right.
We want firms to come here and just feel like they're at home.
Yeah.
Just take a book if you need a book.
This one went real fast because we've talked about it so much.
It's definitely life-changing. Richard Rohr is a Catholic priest.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's a Franciscan priest. He spent time with Franciscan monks.
Okay.
And he has spent some time in Vow of Silence and those kinds of things, but he is officially a Franciscan priest.
And he's written a lot.
Yeah.
And we've read a lot. I mean, one I mentioned in a prior episode was Universal Christ that I'm going back through again right now, which is probably one of his more current books.
Yeah, 5 years maybe, 6 years, something like that. Go.
Yeah, but this particular one, Falling Upward, was helped us really sort of think about our lives.
Yeah. Different kind of guy. Spent some time in Cincinnati, created a company there. It's always about spirituality, but there's something about Rohr that seems to hit a more modern audience. And even people who would consider themselves not religious are following him because of his dedication to this just straight up honesty and a very, very calming presence. I can't explain what he sounds like, but his voice is so calming.
He doesn't sound like he looks like.
No, that's true.
Did you notice that? Because I've watched a lot of his videos when he's given talks as well. But the other thing I would say about Richard is sometimes he sounds like a poet.
Yeah, I wrote that too. He has poetry in him.
Yeah, and the thing I liked about Marcus Borg, a different writer, was Marcus was sort of, he was that college professor.
Not a poet.
Not a poet. Say it.
Yeah.
Mean it.
Yep.
And Richard, I have found that you have to sort of take in his poetry, the way he says things. Even the way he says it sounds like poetry sometimes.
Yeah, it does. He is definitely a modern poet. He got a chance to meet and interview the Pope, Pope Francis, back in 2022. which is a very rare opportunity to sit one-on-one.
Massive deal, right? For
Huge deal.
a Catholic priest to get a
Absolutely.
Pope.
And at that point, I mean, they kind of hit a friendship. I think it would be hard because the Pope doesn't speak much English, I wouldn't think. And I think they had to have a translator, but there's this sense of just friendship that they developed. And the Pope ended up blessing his work. And
Well, they both seem to have that true calming presence.
they're just a calming presence. And I just wrote, as I was writing sort of the notes for this, that he is, to me, a modern day wisdom writer. So when you think about the wisdom literature, Marcus Aurelius, when you think about biblical literature, when you think about old, you think of like ancient writings. To me, Richard Rohr, you could put it right on a shelf next to Marcus Aurelius and it would fit. He just has this wisdom about him that is beyond the modern age, it feels.
Yeah, and the word that you and I sort of gravitated towards a number of years ago was mystic.
Yeah.
And I mean, Richard to me seems like a modern day mystic, if you will.
Yeah, he calls himself a Christian mystic.
Okay.
So if you're not familiar with that term, it's really a term to describe someone who believes in things bigger than themselves.
And can see in more holes. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think what he would say is he wants to see the deepest part of everything in life and every person in life. So whereas most of us have this shell around us and even the things around us, he would say, and I know this sounds, we use the word mystic a lot to describe somebody who is maybe overly spiritual, but he has this practicality to him. But he would say, a tree, there's something deeper than the bark and there's something that lives there. And a mystic looks past the things that are at the surface and sees the deeper thing. And his most profound option for that is people. And so that's what he brings to this book, is this ability to be able to see past the surface.
One of the concepts that I've really been fascinated by lately, John, is that, if you go back and study sort of the concept of the Big Bang and the elements that were a part of, sort of the original formations.
We're looking at them.
Of everything.
Yeah.
And then you look at our DNA or the DNA of everything around us. It's sort of made up of those common elements.
Yeah.
And in his book, Universal Christ, it's like this concept of Christ in all things, or the beginning in everything.
Don't give away that book too much because I have a feeling it's coming down the road.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But yeah, that is sort of his worldview.
Yeah.
And with it comes this sense of acceptance for people who don't believe what he believes or don't come from the faith tradition that he comes from, which I think people find very just relieving. Like, this is a spiritual
I don't think
leader.
he advocates for anybody to
convert or
never. Yeah.
And with that comes just this real sense that he's a spiritual leader. I think of him as one of maybe the last cultural spiritual leaders. He's 80. He has lymphoma. Still working to some extent, but slowing
he has
down.
the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah.
Which I've threatened myself that I'm going to go.
I know it. We need to just make a trip and go down and see Singer and
pass through Gainesville,
go through Gainesville
on to Albuquerque.
Yeah. We need to take our own spiritual pilgrimage at some point and see both those guys before we can't.
Yeah.
And so we should get into the book here. I mean, the truth is, and by the way, a couple of people reached out to me and said, you're giving spoilers away for the book. So spoiler alert, I'm supposed to say, like we're spoiling a movie here, but we are going to talk about the book today, and let you know what it's about. The way I think about these book reviews is that if we're reviewing one of these books, it's worth your time. It's worth your time to give it either on Audible or reading. This is one that's worth your time. This idea, and I'm just all you have to do is say this phrase to Darren and he will get an old fashioned and that's your evening. But the two halves of life
Yeah.
is really the point of this book in my mind.
The thing I would want to pass along to people is don't read a great book just once,
Yeah.
right? Books have a way of hitting you differently as you mature or as your mind develops. And this is one of those books. So you mentioned, John, the two halves of life, and it's exactly as you would expect that to be, the first half and the second half. And the thing I found that was profound about the concept of the first half of life is this sort of building of ego. Mm-hmm. Your ego, like who you are, things you believe in or don't believe in, and all these. It's just this container that you build in order to, I guess, develop your ego. How would you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think it's this necessary. And when he talks about the first half of life, he's never demeaning it. He never thinks of it as immaturity. It's always growth. But there is this necessary moment in your life or set time in your life where you need a shell. You need to build your belief system. So he says at this point in your life, things become very black and white to you. Like it's either true or it's not true. And as you get older, you like smile, like that's not how the world works. But in the early part of your life, you need that, which is why you embrace religion, maybe, why you embrace a staunch, either Republican or Democrat point of view. Strong worldviews come here where I am smart, you're dumb, everything I believe is right, everything you believe is wrong. That's part of the first part of life. Darren, when I was reading this book for the first time, I don't know, Reese must have been middle school. And you know how your kids, you have one of them in the room, so I won't make you acknowledge this, but your kids annoy you sometimes.
No.
They do. Now, I know yours never did. But one of the things Reese used to annoy me with was his fishing for compliments. He would come home from school and be like, Dad, my teacher told me I was the best, blah, blah, blah. What do you know, like, or he would just kind of fish, and it just drove me nuts. And when I was reading this book, I was like, oh, he's building
his ego.
He's building the shell. Dad, is it true that I'm good at this? Dad, would you say that I'm a good athlete? Am I an athlete? Am I this? Am I that? And he's looking for somebody in his life to say, yes, you are this. And this is the first half of life, building who you are, confirming what you're good at, and also creating this sense of your own boundaries for what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. All of those things happen in this first phase of life.
One of the things that Richard says in this book, which I found truly fascinating, is that you can't skip. You can't.
You don't get to choose which phase of life you're in.
You don't get born and go into the second half of life.
Yeah.
My dad's, one of his favorite sayings is, you can't put an old head on young shoulders. And I think that was probably his way of articulating, this. But Richard talks about a lot of people don't get through the first half of life in less than 30 years. Some people maybe a little bit sooner. In my case, maybe a little bit longer. But, it's you can't just skip over it. There's this need to build that container.
Yeah.
And gosh, John, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, and you can save me on the way down. But, as I read, spiritual texts, and I think about the concept of the fall, and everybody's going to have a different, opinions on this. But for me personally, I think of the concept of the fall as developing my ego. Though, that first half of life, the things that I want to have, the way I want things to be. So I develop myself, my ego, the way I want it to be. I'm right, and then you spend the second half of life trying to let go of the ego and grow beyond that.
That's so well said. And I think different faith traditions, different genres of literature say it differently, use different colloquialisms and whatever. But I think we all have this sense that there is this phase of life we have to go through where we build this thing. We build who we are.
Yeah.
And I think it is important. It's clear that this isn't about age. This is about phases. And, he talks about the hero's journey. I love, Joseph Campbell's work, the mythologist who basically who creates this sense that we're all in a hero's journey or heroine's journey. And the idea that we all have this story we're telling where you're the hero. Darren, you and I laugh at friends of ours who stand in front of an audience when it's a funeral or a wedding, and we're like, they are the star of their own show, But there is this reality that there is a story being told, and I'm the hero. And a hero's journey always includes trials and like strife of some sort and something the person has to go through. And what he talks about in the first half of life is that you are going to feel like the hero of the story. And you're going to feel like you're getting a bad shake and that life's not fair and and at some point you're going to have to overcome something. And that's part of the hero story. And then you come to a point where you realize, oh, I'm not the hero of the story. And that's when things begin to evolve and the stages start to shift.
I know a lot of people in my life that I feel like have never evolved beyond the first half of life.
Yeah.
And gosh, that's probably not uncommon. I think one of the things that we took from this book, that we want people to take from this book, is that there are these two halves of life. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you're listening, you can, sort of self-identify. Are you still in that container? You're right about everything. You're, more closed-minded. Other people are wrong. You've got it all figured out. Have you grown beyond that container and starting to understand that there are things bigger than yourself?
Yeah, he almost considers it, and I don't know how much of this I wrote myself. I remember journaling a lot when I read this originally, but I remember this feeling like if you aren't moving from the first half of life to the second half of life at some point, if you aren't moving towards that, and at least in transition when you get to your 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, then you begin to fight against your old self. Because there's part of you that knows those things aren't reality, yeah. But there's another part of you isn't ready to accept that. And without speaking about people I know and love by name, I wouldn't do that. But we all know people who seem to be fighting aging. They seem to be like either wanting for what was when they were younger or holding on to the things that they were and said and believed when they were younger. And then people who just seem to gracefully be embracing the second phase. And I think one of the things that Rohrer is carefully being able to move us through is to say, welcome the second phase.
Yeah.
Because it's a relief, it's a catharsis for you to begin to realize those things need to evolve in you.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure our listeners understand that we are not bashing the first half of life.
I know, it sounds like we are. I don't mean that at all.
I just think it's critical.
Yeah.
And Rohrer talks about how critical it is that you build that container, how necessary it is.
Mm-hmm.
How it's important. And I think of the church in some respect, and how important it is to set those early. I believe this. I believe this. I believe this. I believe this. It's black and white, and
mm-hmm.
Everything's black and white, and it's important to sort of build that container because you can't let go of it if you've never built it, which is why I think Richard talks about the inability to skip, and go from birth to the second half.
Can't just jump there.
You can't just jump.
Yeah. I also, as I was going back preparing this, I was reminded, I went back and read it, about his conversation around homesickness.
Mm-hmm.
That when you do find yourself wrestling with the second half of life, you begin to be homesick for the first half. So his example was like, when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to make a decision about something, you wish you believe the way you used to, that things were so easy. I just wish it
used
was
to be so clear.
It used to be so clear. I used to be so smart, and part of you knows you were naive. The other part wishes that you couldn't unsee in some way. You could unsee some of the things you've seen. And that's a thing you wrestle with as you get older, to go, I miss the days of the simplicity of things being black and white as well.
I think for me personally, I've gotten very comfortable in not knowing pretty much anything, but being comfortable with the conversation about everything.
So your son's in the room.
Yeah.
And he was living with you in a time where you weren't able to say that.
Might not always been like that.
Yeah. So, just for a second, just talk about what it feels like. What's the difference between those two Darrens?
I think some of it is just awareness. Some of it's testosterone, probably.
Some of it's hormonal.
Yeah,
probably
to a degree.
Yeah.
Some of it is just not being exposed to anything beyond that first, that container.
Yeah.
And thinking that container's right. That's why you and I both feel how important it is to develop relationships with people who you can have discussions about all kinds of things, or to read. And can you just imagine if the last thing you learned was sixth grade, math? And
that might be true when it comes to math.
But that was
for me.
But the last thing that you read was when you got out of high school or you got out of college. At least college starts, especially if you do some liberal arts stuff, at least starts teaching you how to think and be more open-minded. But man, all my learning came well after I finished college.
I love that conversation. I also think, and I haven't got into this yet, but I don't think I'm in the second half of life yet.
How would you define it?
The conversation that Rohr has about Shadowlands, do you remember this? Mm-hmm. This is the part where I find myself right now. So Shadowlands, his concept is that there are parts of you that are in the shadows that you aren't aware of, that need to come out. People around you need to tell you, did you know you're grumpy? Did you know you're moody? Did you know that this is how you affect the people around you? And every now and then I still see parts of me, and self-awareness is part of the issue. For me, I am definitely in a period of transition between these staunch beliefs that I held and the ego part into a new way of thinking about things that is more loose. I have to remind myself that because you don't agree with me doesn't mean you're an idiot. I don't ever say that. I wouldn't say that. But people who I may reach across the aisle politically from, I often find myself thinking the way I used to think in the first phase of my life, and I feel like I'm past that, and I catch myself stepping in between them right now. And so I long for the second half of life. I have friends like you, and I spend a lot of time around my mom, who I believe is in that part of her life. And every now and then they'll say something or do something, or every now and then your demeanor, your reaction, it's usually a reaction. Something big happens or something small happens, and you'll react, and I'll be surprised by how you react, and it remind me, I'm not there yet. My brain doesn't do that yet. And I see it's coming. But I think his conversation around the paradox of wanting your whole life to be so structured and wanting the answers, but then the peace and the joy comes when you quit wanting that, when you can hold in tension the want with the know that you're not ever really going to know.
I think that's what I've gotten more comfortable with. But, I think you introduced me to Aristotle's, I at least attributed to Aristotle, the concept of being able to hold two thoughts the mark of an educated mind is the ability to hold two thoughts without accepting or rejecting.
Yeah.
And I just love that idea, because in today's world, so many people are sort of holding on to that container so tightly. From the first half of life, they don't want to have the ability to hold two thoughts loosely and have a conversation without being offended or without feeling like they have to change their mind. Maybe they don't need to change their mind. But it's just, to me, being more comfortable with not knowing for certain all kinds of things is the joy of, getting older, moving into the second half of life.
Mom always says, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know anything.
Yeah,
And I think it's
true.
one of the most profound thoughts that you can have as you get older, and the less need I have for knowing, for sure. But also, the more she reads, the more she cares, the more she tries, but doesn't have, the end goal isn't an answer.
I mean, somebody will tell me, well, but I believe this. I'm like, okay,
Right?
fantastic. But that doesn't make it like right or true or anything else. I mean, I'm fine
Yeah.
with that. I just this whole concept that Richard that he talks about, it just is that there are these two halves of life, and it should be, I think, a journey to move into that second half of life, and how sort of freeing and probably more intoxicating it is for other people when they see you in that second half of life, that they can engage you without knowing that you're all closed up and tied up with that first half.
When I think about Richard, and I think about Mom and you and people that I think have moved in this stage, I think it's clear too that this isn't about a loosey-goosey look at life. This isn't about weakness. This isn't about all of a sudden not having anything to stand up for. It's the opposite. It's like, when I stand for something, it's something that is worth standing for, instead of standing for everything. And I think it's easy to think of this as sort of, as you get older, you get passive. And that's not what the second half of life is. It couldn't be any further from the truth. The second half, according to Rohrer, is that you get more focused on the things that matter. And the things that you don't, so few things matter that it begins to draw your focus, and people are so attracted to people who are focused. And I think that's what I'm missing.
A person that comes to mind for me personally is Oprah.
Yeah.
You and I just both finished
What I Know for Sure.
What I Know for Sure. And you just made me think about that as you talk about how few things, we know for sure.
Yeah.
And the things that she says she knows for sure are more about relationships and things like that than some set of facts.
Absolutely.
Somewhere.
We've used Marcus Aurelius' name a couple times here, and eventually I wouldn't mind doing.
You know how I know who he is?
No.
Gladiator.
Oh, Gladiator.
If you've never seen,
I love Gladiator.
Oh,
There's a new one coming out.
I do know that there's a new one. If you've
Denzel
never
Washington.
seen Gladiator, it's Russell Crowe. Fantastic movie. My wife doesn't like it so much.
No kidding.
I don't think it's.
pretty
It's
hot.
probably
I'm
not her.
surprised.
It's probably not her style of movie. I mean, people getting their heads
There's a
slammed in
lot
and
of
all that kind of
violence.
stuff.
Yeah.
But Marcus Aurelius, is in the opening scene. Not him personally, but him, the character. Is the general of the Roman army. But he used to journal all the time, and he thought deeply about things.
I read his works on a regular basis. It sits on my desk, one of the books that sits on my desk, and I journal regularly. Rohrer's conversation reminds me of the Stoicism. Aurelius was a Stoic.
Yeah.
And the idea of Stoicism is just really simple. It's basically, life is going to happen. You can't control it. The only thing you control is your reaction.
Yeah.
And to me,
That's so first habit of 7 habits.
I mean, it's totally Stephen Covey. Marcus Aurelius said it
Maybe,
before
yeah.
Stephen Covey. But the conversation that where Falling Upward ends is that you become comfortable with your complete lack of control over what happens in your life and the universe.
It's your reaction to it.
And what you become good at is reacting. And that's how I know when I've run across somebody, or at least I start to be suspicious that somebody's in their second half of life, because I'll see them react in a way that is clear and obviously mature. And I can see glimpses, but I feel like I'm in that transition period at this point.
There's just so much good stuff in
Yeah.
this particular book, but it is about this journey. So if you are listening to us and you're 30 something or older, I think this book might help you sort of think about what it means to be in the second half of life, or to start moving towards the second half of life.
Your spouse would really like for you to read this book. Just
Yeah.
an announcement.
Yes.
Your spouse wants you to read this book. It does. It brings you this sense of relationships. And,
It does.
Darren, this is fun. I hope that you heard something today that gets you excited about Richard Rohr. If you've never listened to Rohr, if you are listening to this and his faith or his religion turns you off, take this as your sign to listen anyway, because it doesn't come forward. It's not something that's offensive to anyone.
I don't think. I mean, I see how Richard, being a Catholic priest and a Franciscan, I can see how if people might, if that's not your thing,
Yeah.
that's maybe all you're going to be able to see. But I would encourage you to, if that's not your thing, don't put that
Yeah.
spin on it. Just think about and engage with this concept, because even in the political world we live in today, I mean, it's just hard to think that somebody's all right or all wrong. And
Yeah.
I think this concept of maturing and leaving your container and moving beyond that container, or opening up, is super important.
We'll leave it with that. Thank you for listening today. Thanks for paying attention to these book reviews. We're going to keep them coming. It takes a little more preparation and a little more forethought, but it is what we're passionate about, and appreciate you guys being here today. Keep tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Better Every Day.